Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Reese, Dean of Libraries here at Pepperdine. Good to see so many of you here today, and thanks for making the trip. Thanks for breaking away from your studies and your installation of exhibits and so on for joining us this afternoon. And welcome to the boardroom, the surfboard room, where important decisions are made, where important people meet and gather and deliberate. So we're delighted you're here amongst these Malibu relics, this historic collection of surfboards. Well, we're especially delighted to host today's conversation, this panel discussion on photographer Julius Shulman and renowned architect and I would say visionary William Pereira. Thank you so much for joining us for what promises, I think, to be an engaging conversation that we hope will highlight the creative intersection of these two very important figures. This symposium, you should know, flows out of the library exhibit that's currently on display down the hall. And it's entitled Capturing Innovation. We think both of these figures were very innovative in their time. And so we've labeled that exhibit accordingly. And it seeks to highlight the work of William Pereira as documented through the amazing lens of renowned mid-century architectural documentarian Julius Shulman. Some of you will be familiar with his work. A lot of coffee table books on mid-century architecture feature Shulman's work. Now, if you haven't had a chance to visit the exhibit, we cordially invite you to join us after the talk, where we'll have a reception for you and where we can continue the conversation that starts here in a few moments. The images that you see in the exhibit are courtesy of the Getty Research Institute, who kindly lent us those images for the purpose of this exhibit. Covers, as you'll see, a wide range of styles. I'm stunned by how many different types of buildings Pereira and Associates built over the course of their time working in architecture, building really Los Angeles and the surrounding area. So you'll get to see some of that in today's presentations. Now, to get us started, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this afternoon's conversation, who will introduce Alan and Christopher, and that is Dr. Edward Sterrett, professor of art history at Seaver College, where he teaches courses on Baroque and Rococo architecture, 19th century art, modern art, American art, and contemporary art. Dr. Sterrett holds a PhD in art history from UC San Diego. His doctoral research focused on the convergence of popular image culture and aesthetic discourse in early 18th century France. Prior to joining Pepperdine, he worked at the Getty Research Institute on a project studying the history of the transatlantic art market. He's also the co-founder of Pilale Projects, an exhibition and workshop space dedicated to supporting projects by Pacifica artists here in Southern California. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Edward Sterrett.
Thank you. I don't deserve all that applause. You should save it for our guests. But I'm going to introduce them to you and let them do their presentations. I hope you'll enjoy them. And then I'll just ask a few questions and really open the floor to the rest of you. So I'm going to introduce both of them and then let them get on with their presentations rather than one and then the other, just to keep things smooth. The first is architect and historian Alan Hess, who is author of 22 books on modern architecture and urbanism in the 20th century. His subjects include John Lautner, Oscar Niemeyer, Frank Lloyd Wright, as well as the Ranch House in Las Vegas. And his latest book is The Palm Springs School, 1934 to 1975, published by Rizzoli this year. He's a commissioner on the California State Historical Resources Commission, serves on the boards of Preserve Orange County and Palm Springs Modernism Week. He has been the architecture critic for the San Jose Mercury News, a contributor to the Architect's newspaper, grant recipient from the Graham Foundation for Advanced Studies in the Fine Arts and the Clarence Stein Foundation, and a National Arts Journalism Fellow. He's received awards for his work conserving modern architecture, including the Honor Award from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, among others. I'm getting breathless, so I'm not going to list them all. But he's also helped to conserve or landmark buildings from the modern era, including the CBS television studio, which is a Pereira and Luckman building, Bullock's Pasadena, which is a Wordman and Beckett building, and my personal favorites in my neighborhood, Norm's La Cienega Coffee Shop, Armet and Davis. I should mention the last one on the list because it's pretty cool. Oldest remaining McDonald's stand by Stanley Meston. So he's currently working on a National Register nomination for Pereira's buildings in California, and we're really, really pleased to have him here to talk to us about Pereira today. So I guess we'll do the welcome clap. Thank you. And before we're graced with his presentation, I'll introduce Christopher James Alexander, who's going to be telling us about Julius Shulman's photographs. Christopher is a storyteller, a strategist, a designer, and artist. His company, CJA Creative Collaborations, is dedicated to developing inspiring projects about extraordinary spaces, places, and people. His clients include NASA, Lorcan O'Harley Architects, Historic Resources Group, Wayfarers Chapel, the Barnsdall Art Park Foundation, and James Jean. His evolving pottery practice, CJA Ceramics, allows him to create and share one-of-a-kind wheel-thrown vases and bowls with distinctive shapes and glazes. Prior to launching his business, Christopher was a curator of architecture and design at the Getty Research Institute. While at the Getty, he served as the co-curator of exhibitions including Julius Shulman's Los Angeles, Julius Shulman Modernity and the Metropolis, Overdrive, LA Constructs the Future, 1940 to 1990, and Lessons from Bernard Rudofsky. He's the author of Julius Shulman's Los Angeles and the co-editor of Overdrive, LA Constructs the Future, 1940 to 1990, and his essays are featured in publications including Amplified Urbanism, James Jean, Eternal Journey, and World Architecture and Society, From Stonehenge to One World Trade Center. Christopher earned his Master's of Architecture degree from UCLA and a Bachelor of Arts degree in Fine Arts and Art History from George Washington University. So we're really excited for his presentation on Julius Shulman today. Join me in welcoming Chris. Alan's going to start us off. Right? You have what you need?
I think so. Good afternoon. Really good to be here. I was here a couple of years ago. Why? Oh, I'm pushing the red laser. That doesn't work. There we go. Really great to be here. I was here a couple of years ago, but I've been able to become reacquainted with the campus. It's a beautiful campus. For more than just this spectacular view we get from every single room on the campus, I imagine. But the thing is that I went to an architecturally distinguished college as well, Principia College by Bernard Maybeck in Southern Illinois. And it had a great effect on me. And so I'm walking around here today and hoping that this beautifully designed, beautifully planned campus is having an effect on you. Now, the effect on me is I went on to architecture school, which I was going to become a lawyer, but instead I became an architect. But the power of our environment to heighten and emphasize what our environment is and how we interact with it is just a spectacular thing. William Pereira, I'm going to go through, he was born in 1909, he died in 1984, I think, and long career, widely published, major buildings. I'm not going to be able to cover them all, but I want to give you a sense of how his career unfolded over time, because it isn't as well known as it should be. When you see the buildings that are both in the exhibit and here in our presentations, you'll recognize so many of them. They are the buildings which shape your idea of Southern California in many important ways. Where did those come from? Here he is in his office, standing in front of the plan for Irvine, both the University of California, Irvine, and the city of Irvine. I'll be getting into that a little bit later. But where did he start? He started in Chicago, born in Chicago, went to the University of Illinois Architecture School, but then soon, very, very young, had his own firm with his brother Hal. Interesting person, if anybody's interested in the movies, his brother Hal became a major art director at Paramount, and did many great movies as well. Talented family. But here's what he was doing at the very beginning of his career. Now, I'm currently working on a large research project on Pereira, and a lot of this information has remained hidden for reasons which I'll be going into. But here he is in 1937, 1938 in Chicago, the Esquire Theater, an absolutely original and distinctive Art Deco design on the near north side of Chicago. The use of materials, the use of neon, and Google the Esquire Theater because interiors of this were absolutely gorgeous as well. But the thing is, it was being original. It was just copying other Art Deco buildings. On the right is a tuberculosis sanitarium that he designed at the same time, 1938, in Waukegan, Illinois. Now, it is modern in style. It's even international style, in concrete as well. But again, it's a very original definition and use of the forms, shapes, concepts of modern architecture at that early point. All the glass along the floor that you see there, tuberculosis patients at the time believed needed a lot of sunlight. So we made sunlight as part of all of these rooms. Anyway, it's a remarkably masterful composition for a young architect. So they got his start in the Midwest. Then he decided to move to Los Angeles in 1938 with his wife, who was a young movie star. And of course, the place to be is Hollywood. Pereira himself got a job with Paramount and RKO as an art director, a producer, and out of there you see him in the lower left-hand corner on one of the sound stages as well during the filming of one of his films. But among his many accomplishments in the movie industry, he was awarded an Oscar in 1941 for the movie Reap the Wild Wind, a Cecil B. DeMille production. Cecil B. DeMille was one of the biggest producers in Hollywood. There, Pereira and his talent was working at the very height of Hollywood in that era. But despite his success in Hollywood, he wanted to remain an architect. So all through the time, and this is something that is not generally, he's kind of been dismissed in many ways because of his work for Hollywood. He was just an art director. But all through his time in Hollywood, he was also at his own office, designing a number of different projects and achieving, but when he was still in his late 30s, a remarkable reputation. Here on the left, I don't know if you can see some of these drawings behind. These were a plan for the Music Center long before the Music Center was actually built. But Los Angeles needed an auditorium for opera, for dance, for music. And at that time, a group of citizens got together, a group of architects to design this. The architects included nationally and even internationally famous architects. I'll zap this one over here. This is Reginald Johnson, very great social architect. I got to get these right. Next to him is William Worcester, a really important San Francisco architect. And next to him is Eero Saarinen, who went on to his own spectacular career. But notice, well, also, who is right in the center of this? 38, 39-year-old William Pereira. And this is in 1938. So he had already established himself, at least in the architecture community. To Pereira's, just to the right of Pereira is Wallace Harrison, who also was the project architect for the United Nations building in New York. Next to him, Gordon Kaufman, and then also the great industrial designer, Henry Dreyfuss as well. So this is the milieu in which he is working, and this is in the 1930s and going into the 1940s. In his career, in his office, something I do want to mention, he hired, and this is in the early 1950s, he hired Asian Americans and women when they were often either not really hired in those offices or not recognized. But the Asian American gentleman here is Jin Wong, who went on to become the major designer in that office. Now, the international style, quick architectural history. The international style started in Europe in the 19-teens and 1920s. Walter Gropius's design for a factory in the lower left-hand corner evolved and grew in size and influence so that you have the Seagram's building in New York by Mies van der Rohe and Philip Johnson. And yet, at this time, in the 1950s, the international style was running out of steam. It had been around for 40, 50 years. It was running out of ideas. There was a need for refreshing the idea of modern architecture. Now, modern architecture, the use of technology, the use of new methods of construction was still a very important part of the architectural profession. But it didn't have to look like a refrigerator. It didn't have to look like just a glass box. And that is where Pereira, way out here on the West Coast, away from many of the journals and academies and tastemakers of the East Coast, had the freedom to take modern architecture in new directions. One which I think Edward mentioned is CBS Television City, 1952. An extraordinary building. 1952, television was brand new. Nobody knew what television was going to become. And yet, Pereira and Luckman, his partner at the time, designed a studio, a television studio, specifically designed for the needs of television, not theater, television, which is still in use today as a set of studios. Now that is remarkably visionary. It's farsighted. It displays the vision of planning that is so important to Pereira's career. I have this photograph of it because, in fact, this is Elvis Presley. Everybody knows who Elvis Presley is, right? His famous breakthrough performance on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1956 was not filmed or televised from New York. It was televised from CBS Television City in Los Angeles. So that's why I have Elvis there. With his partner, Charles Luckman, who you see in the middle there, Luckman already had many great connections to government and to business because he had been the head of Lever Brothers soap products. But as you see here, they're standing around chatting with President Eisenhower. This is the level of client, of relationships that Pereira and Luckman very quickly established. And out of that came Pereira's idea of what modern architecture could be, beyond the international style, opened up to nature, not so rigid and rectilinear, but sculptural, spatial as well. This is the LA County Museum of Art, designed by Pereira, actually after he parted with Luckman. This is the original version of it, which was unfortunately altered over the years in many ways. But just an extraordinary vision, which of course has been torn down the last couple of years for a brand new building. That's a whole other issue, which I won't go into right now. My favorite, and I think the most significant building, was this, the Metropolitan Water District building for Los Angeles. What is going on here? One of the things is, notice how the structure is pulled out from the middle of the building and made into a sculptural element that goes up and reaches to the sky. But also notice those panels on either side. What are those? Those are sunscreens. Here, in the early 1960s, Pereira was interested in passive solar design. How do you cut down energy use? Through the design of architecture. And he does it with these panels with the holes cut in them so that this bright sunlight doesn't get into the inside of the building and heat it up and have to be cooled with refrigerated air. He was ahead of his time in using this concept. Or historic preservation. Here is his addition on the right to the LA Times building, right across from City Hall in Los Angeles. On the left is the 1930s building, the original LA Times building, magnificent Art Deco building by Gordon Kaufman. At this time, frankly, modern architects didn't care about old architecture. They just wanted to build their new architecture. And yet in this building, Pereira responds to the old building. He respects it. He keeps it lower. He continues its line, its setback, its complementary colors as well. So he was not creating his own monument at this point. He was respecting the historic building. Unfortunately, again, this building, the Pereira wing, is going to be replaced at some point with these high-rise buildings as well. It was nominated to the Historic Cultural Monument status in Los Angeles, but the city decided to go ahead and okay its demolition for this new residential high-rise. Okay, planning, very important part. This is what suburbia looked like after World War II, 1950s, 1960s. Shopping centers, housing tracts of look-alike ranch houses. There's a certain, in my opinion, beauty to that, but nonetheless, it wasn't the ideal sort of city. Where were the parks? Where was the open space? Where were the libraries? Where were the schools? And were they convenient to get to? Did you have to use your car or could you walk? This was the challenge to all American cities at that time. Pereira at Irvine solved those problems. In fact, I live in Pereira, so I speak of what I have experienced as well. What we have here is the plan for the University of California to become one with the city of Irvine as well. And this is what it looks like more at ground level. Notice the open space, notice the green spaces, notice the different types of buildings collected together to encourage different income levels, different age groups, et cetera, to create a real community. Notice the recreation areas. A library would eventually go in here. This was revolutionary. It's a way to design a city, and it solved the problems of the conventional suburbs that were being built, frankly, because they were needed. There was a housing crisis in 1950s, 1960s America. So we needed to build a lot of housing very quickly. It wasn't always very well planned, but this is Pereira's answer. At the university, it was on what had been grazing land. It was rolling land. And he doesn't cut off the tops of these hills. He sets his buildings so that they float over the natural topography of the land. Again, respecting nature, working with nature. Also for suburbia, he designed aerospace industries, department stores, the Hunt Foods campus, which is a gorgeous building in Fullerton, and even, also the recreational industry, the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas. That no longer looks like that, of course, but Pereira designed that in 1953. It put him on the cover of Time magazine in 1963 with the master plan of Irvine as his background. This is how famous he became. Also in this period, he was designing the Transamerica Pyramid in San Francisco, a building which was absolutely detested by San Franciscans at the time. I lived in the Bay Area, so I remember. It was by this interloping Los Angeles architect. And yet it has become one of the most beloved buildings of San Francisco. But you see, Herb Caen was the chronicler for the San Francisco Chronicle of San Francisco life and culture and arts and society. And there he even puts it into the head of his column. And today it's been restored and the building is beloved by San Francisco. Oh, I'm going too fast there. So I have something special here, which is, what do you think is at the top of that pyramid? This is a view looking up from the very top floor, and there are these walkways that go all the way up to the very pinnacle of it. It's a marvelous space that no one ever gets to see, but it is part of the architecture. However, at that time in Los Angeles, especially in the 1970s, 1980s, a new group of younger architects, Frank Gehry, for example, was coming along. Tom Main of Morphosis, Fred Fisher, Eric Owen Moss, Robert Mangurian, Craig Hodgetts, and Coy Howard as well, which took architecture in a different way. Architects were not as interested in modernism as in something new. So at this point, Pereira's career really kind of tapered off. His reputation had never been as lofty as, for example, Richard Neutra or Rudolf Schindler. I think that's something today that we have the information to challenge that. He had been known as, by a famous San Francisco architecture critic, as Hollywood's idea of an architect, which for a San Franciscan was a real slam. But today we are reassessing Pereira. Here, Ed Ruscha, who painted this very famous painting of the LA County Museum on fire. But Ruscha is saying that Pereira occupies a position that can't go unnoticed in LA. Now I look at some of the things he has done and they come around and tap me on the shoulder. So my charge to you as people who live every day with Pereira here on the campus is to understand what is going on around you. What is this plan and these buildings and these spaces all about? And maybe learn from those and take them forward. Certainly, I plead with you at least to recognize the importance of William Pereira in the broad history of modern architecture. One more thing I want to say is that we have today with us William Pereira's daughter, Monica Pereira, here sitting in the front row. And we're very honored to have her. She has given me a lot of great information about who he was as a person, what were his interests. And so I'm sure she'll be able to, would be willing to talk with you also afterwards at the reception. So that's all I have to say, Edward, but thank you very much.
I was looking on the screen. Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm grateful to Pepperdine University, your dean, Jeffrey, Edward, and all of their colleagues for the opportunity to join you today. And very happy to be presenting alongside Alan, who I admire and have learned so much from over the years. Julius Shulman was born in Brooklyn in 1910. His family moved to from Connecticut to LA when he was 10. In our oral history with Shulman for our Getty exhibition, Julius Shulman's Los Angeles, he said The history of Los Angeles is a history of my life. While fondly reflecting on his photographs, which promoted the development of downtown LA, Shulman frequently declared, "This picture is history. You have to have vision." William Pereira was born in Chicago in 1909. He moved to LA in 1938 at the age of 29. In his book about Pereira, James Steele writes, "Vision is a word that frequently crops up in connection with Pereira. His rare talent to clearly see possibilities and potential problems that convinced many clients and colleagues alike that he was a man ahead of his time." And according to Steele, Pereira's idea of regional planning was to design plans to satisfy the future. No one in Los Angeles at that time seemed to have a clearer view of the future than he did. Pereira didn't design merely functional buildings, and Shulman didn't just take basic photographs. Their work was dedicated to promoting bold ideas infused with an aura of infinite possibilities. The wonderful exhibition that we're discussing today allows us to reflect on the innovation, joy, loss, and transformation that we've all experienced during our LA adventures and ponder the future of the complex metropolis that Pereira and Shulman shaped. So I'm going to share a few of my favorite buildings and a few of my favorite Shulman photographs. You'll see the artistry of Julius Shulman and the vision of Pereira, the architect that he was documenting and promoting. The Occidental Life Insurance Company of California in 1965. This is a beautiful view from this outdoor terrace from a 32-story building overlooking the 10 freeway, looking out into the west. When I moved here in 2001, it was the Transamerica Tower, and it had a very fancy restaurant up at the top. It was called Windows Restaurant. That's where you went for a special occasion. And it was a great place to be. It's been changed, altered, and that'll be a theme throughout the presentation today, seeing the original vision, seeing how these buildings and spaces have been adapted over time. So the Windows Restaurant Pavilion that was hovering with these spider leg columns has been enclosed in glass. It's now the USC Tower of the South Park Center. But the idea of how Shulman captured it and documented this project, I think, reveals his vision and boldness. This is the elevator lobby. So you can imagine if this is what he does with an elevator lobby, what he can do with other areas of a structure or a site. It's all about these really impressive and dynamic diagonal lines. It's about bold composition, about very precise lighting. Nothing in a Shulman photograph is accidental. The inspiration may have been serendipitous, but the intentionality, the choreography, the structure is all meticulous and perfectly planned. It allowed him to be called One-Shot Shulman, which he was very proud to declare as a nickname. He would go to a site, set up his cameras, take one photograph, and then move on to the next location. So at the Getty, when we acquired his massive archive of 7,000 projects, there are about 70,000 vintage prints, about 10 images per project, roughly. 10 photos, roughly, for each project, instead of dozens or hundreds of images that other photographers may have taken. He had complete confidence in his talent and in his vision to capture a place correctly the first time. So I'm going to show a lot of black and white photography because I think that provides a sense of timelessness, especially when we're looking at buildings from different eras, but his color photographs are magnificent as well. So here's a good example where the color photograph, much better than the black and white. That bold pop of color we see in the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company headquarters. These are all Pereira projects, 1958. So I encourage you to explore Julius Shulman's photographs of the case study houses. You'll see the way he incorporated fashion and furniture and texture and color to provide a sense of space and place and really allow us to understand what it would feel like to be in those places. When people would ask him, "Are you a photographer or are you an artist?" he would say, "I'm a businessman." And his idea and his job was to promote the architecture. So he would do that in any way that he could. LEX was the gateway to my arrival to Los Angeles, as it was for many of us. And this was done with Pereira's firm in collaboration with Paul R. Williams and Welton Becken and Associates. This is the way it was originally designed. You can see the idea of a really single level master planned airport that has grown and evolved over time. Like it or not, when we go to LAX, we see something that has grown and has been densified and is evolving as part of a master plan vision. Kind of amazing to see all those surface parking lots and think about all the open space and vistas that we could enjoy that then are built upon today. The theme building, which was created in Pereira and Luckman's office by James Langenheim as the designer, that comes to symbolize Los Angeles in its entirety. I think even though it was built in the 1960s, we still think of the theme building as manifesting and embodying the idea of the city of LA being a city of the future, a city on the move, a city with ambition and swagger. I'm interested to see how our perceptions of this space change now that the automated people mover is being constructed and will open next year. This is a 2.25-mile line of track that'll have 6 stations that connect the world's largest rental car facility and all of the LA Metro rail system and the different terminals in LA. So it's going to be a tremendous improvement to that busy space. Going around it now at that level, I think we're going to have connections to maybe Epcot Center and the geodesic dome of a monorail going alongside that iconic space at Walt Disney World. So it'll become a different perspective that we can appreciate this iconic building. This project is equally important in the idea that Robinson's department store was a place in Beverly Hills that we've lost, and new visions are underway for that project and that parcel. But the way that Julius Shulman captured it also reveals the way that he liked to manipulate images with his partners. You can see this is a pre-Photoshop strategy to eliminate all of the additional extraneous elements of lampposts and even the iconic tree branch that Shulman liked to include in his images to cover the top portion, and extending even the building on the right side so it looks longer and larger. You don't see many of these kinds of manipulations in the Shulman archive, but I'm sharing it with you just because I think it's a cool before and after to appreciate in this pre-digital era. But Shulman was about any trick to the trade, anything to promote and sell an image that he could use, he would employ. This is the One Beverly Hills project that is now rising from that site, designed by Sir Norman Foster's firm, and Rios is doing this magnificent landscaping of these 17 acres. So it'll become a new gateway to Beverly Hills. It's a complex site that has been occupied and waiting for a resurrection for many decades now. We'll see how it turns out. Alan introduced the Metropolitan Water District headquarters building to us from 1963. I love these photographs because it reveals how Julius Shulman was, again, promoting a structure, but also showing that a building is also can serve as a billboard for the product that it provides. You see the water fountains and the reflecting pools. Alan mentioned conservation, but in the 1960s also there was a sense that we would never run out of water, which now we are conserving in an important clip. And then the visions of the future here for this site. There's the Elysian Apartments that is opened, 96 units, and then this grand vision for 1111 Sunset. SOM, Kengo Kuma, Stanley Seidowitz, James Corner Field Operations are all involved in this master plan, which would bring 778 residential units, 98 hotel rooms, 48,000 square feet of offices, 95,000 square feet of commercial space, 1,600 parking spaces in a 49-story tower, a 31-story tower, a 17-story tower, and 26 low-rise buildings. So this landscape is significant. This project and vision is actually a compromise that was reached with the developer and preservationists who attempted unsuccessfully to landmark the campus when it was threatened with demolition in 2016. So now the structures are part of the landscape and are keeping many of the historic elements intact. Again, this idea of fountains, advertising, and a beautiful way how Shulman captures them in the evening with the light and the sense of water. These are sunshades that create dappled light, but they also kind of remind me of raindrops, like they're just filtering down into the pool, replenishing the fountains below. And that led to these iconic pools of water and fountains at the LA County Museum of Art in 1965. We have to ask Alan about this, but from what I've heard, soon after LACMA opened, the tar from the adjacent La Brea tar pits seeped into those reflecting pools, kind of clogged up the fountains, and they had to drain many of the pools. But we'll confirm that with Alan. But it was a vision of the future, again, a grand arrival and procession to get into the space. And Shulman, the way he captures every different dimension and angle of a structure always fascinated me. So this is the one of the main atrium spaces and the main pavilion, looking up at the lighting panels overhead, a little tree branch to provide some vegetation. He loved putting people in his photographs. There's a beautiful sculpture that stands in, provides context. But again, dynamism and boldness and beautiful composition. And across the street, we have William Pereira looking over at what now is gone of LACMA, but standing proud, the Mutual Benefit Life Insurance Company building in 1971 now will always loom over the new LACMA designed by Peter Zumthor, which will open next year. It's a massive project, very controversial, spanning Wilshire Boulevard, this linear downtown from downtown to the ocean. Lots of things to talk about with this plan, but I like the idea, especially in a day like today, that Pereira will always be present. He is always monitoring the situation, maybe passing judgment or providing some shade to that concrete pad below. We'll see. Another great project is Marineland of the Pacific, done in 1959. This is in Rancho Palos Verdes. Marineland was the world's largest oceanarium when it opened in 1954. It was home to two famous orca whales named Corky and Orky. You've heard of them, I'm sure. They also had the first pilot whales ever captured for display. Their names were Bubbles and Bimbo. You know them as well. And an array of dolphins, sea lions, seals, and sharks. So Shulman didn't photograph Orky, Corky, Bubbles, or Bimbo, but I love his portraits of this incredible dolphin in action. So maybe we can name this dolphin, I don't know, is it Peppy for Pepperdine or Sharera for Shulman and Pereira? We can do some name, but we'll come up with that later at the reception. The park was purchased by the owner of SeaWorld theme park in 1986. They promised to restore the site, which was crumbling and losing money. However, those plans were canceled and the park was abruptly closed in 1987. The majority of the park was abandoned for about 20 years, with the exception of the Marineland restaurant, which remained open until 2004 as the Catalina Room because it had a view of Catalina Island. So the site was demolished in 2007 to make way for the Terranea Resort, which was completed in 2009 by Lowe Enterprises, an LA-based real estate development firm. So now there are pools with only human beings frolicking, no Corkies or Bubbles or Orkies, but it is a magnificent place and an area that I've been thinking a lot about. I'm including this not because it was designed by Pereira, but it was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright Jr. This is Wayfarer's Chapel. This is from 1951, Shulman capturing it. This was my favorite building in Los Angeles. It was a jewel box of a space where you could go and reflect and enjoy a magnificent view. It was just recently disassembled by my friends from Architectural Resources Group because of these very dramatic landslides that are literally ripping the earth apart in that area. The site was moving 6 to 9 inches a week. And so the congregation very quickly mobilized and had it disassembled very carefully. It's now all in storage and will be rebuilt on another site. My colleague and I, Steve Ocheng, created a short fundraising film video for Wayfarers Chapel. We were the last team to go in and document the property before it was taken apart. It will rise again, but it is part of the transformation that we are all grappling with of Mother Nature and the built environment. Sometimes, again, Mother Nature is the cause of forcing us to relocate our built treasures. Sometimes human ambition is the catalyst for other significant relocation projects. This is the salt box and the castle and Union Bank Plaza in 1967, photographed by Julius Shulman. The architects of the salt box and castle are known, but A.C. Martin and Associates designed the Union Bank Plaza as part of the Bunker Hill redevelopment project. In 1969, these two last Victorian houses of Bunker Hill were moved to Heritage Square, located alongside the 110 Arroyo Seco Parkway. They were designated LA Historic Cultural Monuments number 5 and number 27 in 1962 and 1964, but sadly, soon after the move, they were burned to the ground due to an arson fire. So Shulman's photograph is an important record of those two structures and that idea of transformation and change. The Bunker Hill redevelopment project was a massively ambitious vision that William Pereira and many other architects were involved in designing in 1958. This is the actual document for the vision to radically transform downtown LA. In order to do this, it's a 136-acre site. So 7,677 bedrooms were destroyed, 400 Victorian mansions were demolished, 6,000 people were evicted. Advertisers were commissioned to create a $100,000 promotional campaign for the project. There's a quote saying, "Before we could sell the idea of living in Bunker Hill Towers, we would have to sell the idea of living downtown." Agency principal Phil Bentley explained to the LA Times in 1968. And before we could implant the idea of living downtown, we would have to generate the idea that there's a renaissance downtown. So they hired Julius Shulman to document the site, the ultimate LA booster. You can see the vision for the Bunker Hill plan, enumerating the idea of creating a new downtown for the enjoyment and improvement for all Angelenos, but at the sacrifice of so many thousands of individuals. It is a loaded site. When you go down and you see the museums and the cultural renaissance there, we have to think about what was removed in order to bring about this change, which was decades in the making. They envisioned it being completed years after it was complete. It took so long to do. That was the original kind of configuration and parcel plans of Bunker Hill. That was their vision of renewal, these mega blocks. You can see here, Shulman photographed this image saying, this is the hill, slums, blight, crowded, their justification for what they were about to do. This is our approach. So this is their approach. They scraped it clean and literally had a blank slate to work with. That is radical, that is visionary, that is bold, and that is violent. And so we think about this place when we reflect on, this is the photograph that Julius Shulman captured from the back corner of the Department of Water and Power building by A.C. Martin. Along that reflecting pool, he skims literally the surface of all of the parking lots and all of the emptiness that you saw there. So do you see the upper right-hand corner of the DWP building? And it's all about how he frames the image. Where do you place your camera? How do you crop an image? How do you orchestrate a perspective that shows that this city has already evolved? It's ready to be inhabited. It's ready to be occupied. And that's a powerful vision. I love the idea that Pereira was involved in the 1958 plan, thinking about the visionary future of LA, but also that photograph was taken from a Pereira building. This is the Crocker Citizens National Bank building in 1968. So Shulman used that as his perch to then document what was happening below. So Pereira, always present. Again, see how he frames the photo of the music center for LA County, designed by Welton Beck and Associates. And then this was one of his favorite photographs. The Mark Taper Forum was just finishing up construction. They were rehearsing inside, the actors. And Shulman went to the site with a PR agent, and he said, I'm sorry, we didn't move the bulldozers. We can move all this away. And Shulman, which you can hear in the oral history film in the exhibition, exclaims, no, 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 I have a vision. Bring out the actors. And he poses them amongst the construction site. And now he says, now I'm not just a photographer, I'm a producer. And he loved this photo. He had a vision. In closing, I think about the connections of the site when we think about Pereira's plan for Bunker Hill, when we think about the fact that now when we visit that place, we are in awe of Disney Concert Hall and the connection that Pereira had to Frank Gehry, who was one of his students. So Pereira became a professor of architecture at USC in 1949. Gehry was a student of his. Apparently, he liked Gehry's thesis project and became a mentor to Gehry. Gehry worked for his firm for a short while. And I wonder what would have happened if Pereira hadn't liked Gehry's USC thesis. And think about all the amazing structures and spaces we might not have been able to enjoy if that relationship had gone the other way. So in these tumultuous times, the connections between Pereira and Shulman, and Pereira and Gehry, and Shulman and Jürgen Nogai are very important to note. In the last years of his life, Jürgen Nogai, a very talented photographer, became Julius Shulman's partner, his artistic partner, and they photographed many other projects through the end of Julius Shulman's life. They were a wonderful team. That was a friendship and a professional relationship that allowed Shulman to continue to create and thrive. So I remind us all to surround yourself with supportive friends and inspiring professors. Nurture those meaningful connections, explore beautiful landscapes with your team, dream up extraordinary spaces together, and build the next chapter of your LA adventure with people you love, trust, and admire, and then share your visions of the future with the world. Thank you.
Running a little bit later than we were expecting, so I don't get to ask as many questions. And you may have to save some of yours for the reception, which is right around the corner in the exhibit. So I have so many questions now that I got to listen to you both talk, but I'm actually going to pitch the very one we discussed ahead of time, because I think it fits really with Chris's ending, which is this idea of friendship and of personal connection. And take this opportunity to thank Monica again for being here. Make sure you ask Monica some questions as well when you get her ear. But you both have a kind of different kinds of personal connection to the people that you're working on. I know, Chris, that you worked very directly with Julius Shulman. I know less about Alan's connection to Pereira, but I know that you live in Irvine. You live a life inside of his vision in a very literal way. And I'm wondering if each of you could speak a little bit to how that connects to what you've shared with us today.
Well, in terms of Julius Shulman, I did work with him on a book about Palm Springs and had a chance to talk with him. Though I had a long experience with him the first time he came to one of my talks about my first book on Googie, roadside commercial architecture. He said, how can you even talk about those types of ugly commercial buildings in the context of Richard Neutra and John Lautner and all these great other architects. After that, I got to know him, and he appreciated, I think perhaps because of what I was able to show him about his own work. He photographed Googie buildings. He photographed everything. He was the hardest working man in architectural photography. Factories, bathrooms, sinks, kitchens, as well as great monuments. But he had that ability to open up, to realize that what he had done in his career, he was a businessman, he was really commercial, but out of that, he created really what we can see as great art as well. And he had the ability to grow and realize that all the way up. How old was he when he died? He was in his 90s, I think.
98.
98, yeah. So, and in terms of Pereira, I certainly think of it, I bike through Irvine. He put in bike paths off-road along beautiful green belts and so forth. So in so many ways, the vision of a planned community involving nature, community, others, convenience, function as well is something I do live with every day and appreciate.
Yes.
Planning something just before he died. He wanted another community like Irvine. He wanted people to be able to walk and have neighbors and have the greenways and being bike to work instead of taking a car to work. I mean, that was his vision. And he had, I think it was in back east somewhere, that if they had started this and it never got built. But yeah, you're living the dream.
So Shulman shaped so much of my life. He was so passionate about what he did, and he loved sharing his work with everyone. And so I started working at the Getty Research Institute as a research assistant. Soon after I arrived, the Gettys had acquired his archive, and we were tasked with having, as part of the acquisition agreement, an exhibition for his 95th birthday, which was about a half a year later. I didn't know anything about anything, so I thought that was lots of time. But my wonderful colleague, Wim de Wit, who was the curator of architecture and the head of special collections, looked at me and said, go down in the vaults and start picking photos. And so I did. And I fell in love with LA. I learned so much about the city through Julius Shulman's photographs. And we had this first exhibition, Julius Shulman, Modernity in the Metropolis, at the GRI Gallery. And there was a line out the door. I mean, just people waiting to see these images and these photographs. They were connecting deeply with his work, and they were talking with each other about the photographs. So I was seeing the power of photography to bring people together, in addition to preserving memories of the past and, again, visions of the future. But it was about community and connection, rooted in passion and diligence and practice. As Alan said, he was a busy, hardworking individual. And when you look at his logbook of 7,000 projects, whenever I needed some inspiration or sustenance, and now I'm with my business now 10 years of trying to grow it and evolve and taking it day by day, I would look and think about his logbook. Every day of the week, he was photographing another location. And it didn't matter, again, the content or the character. He had preferences, but he also would go to each site saying, it's my job to promote this, to sell it, to capture it, to amplify it. And he did. So I'm grateful for all the time we spent, and so grateful that we can now continue to enjoy his images today and learn about him and the place that we call home, and see how it's changing and how it's changed over time.
Take one from the audience at least before we adjourn to the. Thank you.
I imagine this would be hard to decide, but if there was one iconic Shulman image and one iconic Pereira building, could you Could you name that, both of you?
You have yours selected?
Sure. Well, I think that Wayfarer's Chapel, the photograph I shared with you, is really important. It's showing how that building looked when it was first built and constructed, but it was surrounded by redwood trees. It was made of redwood, and then over time, those trees grew to enshroud it in vegetation, and it became this very intimate and cozy space. But you could see again what it was. Shulman was, usually the first person on the site to document it. Richard Neutra which was his first client and longtime business partner, always wanted to see photographs that Julius took of his buildings, and they were just constructed, so there was no vegetation surrounding them. And so Shulman would send him the prints, and Richard Neutra would send them back with black, wax ink pen, drawing in all the plants and bushes, and then Shulman would look at that and then print the photo without all of that as well. But the sense that we see change in time evolving, and the fact that we will never see Wayfarer's Chapel again as Shulman captured it, or even as we knew it a year ago. So it's a sacred place, and that has a lot of meaning for me. For the Pereira building, I have many moments in Pereira buildings, but I think about LACMA and going to the original LACMA and visiting Brancusi's Bird in Space, my favorite sculpture, and having a sense of a place to visit and be with community and people. And so I'm looking forward to seeing where that sculpture may be living in the new building, but I always think about it in the Pereira LACMA.
Okay, for my favorite Shulman photograph, it's a color photograph of Albert Frey's North Shore Yacht Club down on the Salton Sea. And it is so vibrant. It has so much color in it. It is fun. It's about pleasure, which is one of the contributions that California modern architecture has made to global modern architecture. And that photograph captures that part of California and Shulman's ability to really zero in on something important. Pereira building, favorite Pereira building, is very difficult, but it was your photograph of the Metropolitan Water District, that angle. When I really started to study that building, realized what he was doing, how different it was than anything that had come before. He was establishing a whole new direction for modern architecture. The way the building, again, you have to study that photograph. There are those circles in the sunscreens, but then they are repeated in the pavement as well. And you have the water coming through. And though I don't think you can see it in that picture, the other interesting thing is that from that building, Metropolitan Water District, overlooking Sunset Boulevard near downtown, you can also see in the distance the Department of Water and Power on Bunker Hill that Chris showed as well. These two great monuments, again, to California modern life and architecture and expressions of that. I guess what I appreciate about that building is it does establish a new direction bravely and does it so well, so that even though the building is in very bad shape today, you can still see what that vision was all about, and perhaps that can inspire us for the future.
I'm going to invite you all to join us in the exhibit for some refreshments and hopefully to ask a few more questions. But before we go, can you just join me in thanking Alan and Chris for presenting?